Today in Great Stories in Bioethics, we're talking about one of the darkest episodes in American medicine and public health, the story of the Tuskegee syphilis. The Tuskegee Study was not a secret study. It was published in 13 medical journals. Only one physician ever objected to the study. A lot of people know it was bad, but exactly why it was bad is not really very well known. So this is Great Stories in Bioethics, and I hope you learned something from this episode. So we have to go back in time in history to 1929, when the Julius Rosenwald Foundation tried to do a good thing. Some people say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Maybe that's the case here. They wanted to do a study that proved that you could treat people with syphilis. And at the time, there were 6 pockets of syphilis with very high concentration. And the highest of all was in Macon County, Alabama, where 36% of the people had syphilis, either latent syphilis or active syphilis with a chancre. So they went in and they had a couple thousand people, and they treated them with the treatment of the time, which was a kind of arsenic paste that you put on the back. Didn't make people feel good. And then the stock market crashed and the Great Depression started. And they had to leave, they had no money. And actually the budget for the United States Public Health Service went from $1 million to $60,000, which is a cautionary tale about planning for the future. However, the Rosenwald Foundation had identified about 400 men with latent syphilis who were not treated. And the Public Health Service stepped in and started to think about doing something else. Now, it's very important that at the time, one of the ways to get people to be not infected with syphilis was called syphilophobia. It made people really afraid of getting syphilis, and they made it seem like it was a rapidly fatal neurodegenerative disease. So it turns out that some Norwegians had started to study and follow people with syphilis for a long time. A man named Beck started in 1890, and he followed people to 1910, and then his student Bruce Gard followed them from 1910 to 1929. And in terms of syphilophobia, these two men discovered something amazing, that 70% of people with syphilis were asymptomatic or died of something else other than syphilis. This created the idea, since getting the arsenic paste on your back was not a great thing, and you needed about 20 treatments to prevent aortic artery disease, and it cost about $1 a week, which a lot of poor people didn't have, that people might actually be better off not getting the arsenic treatment and just letting syphilis run its course. So this is when the United States Public Health Service made a fateful decision to decide to follow 400 men for life to see the long-term effects of syphilis. There was a racist element to the study, undoubtedly, because it wouldn't have been done in Westchester County or Montgomery County, Maryland, largely white suburbs. These men were very vulnerable. They were sharecroppers. They were tied to the land, and the Public Health Service knew they weren't going to leave. It's not like they live in big cities and were going around. In fact, 2 people later came to Birmingham for treatment and were sent back to Tuskegee. This was the beginning of the study. Now, over the next decades, physicians came and went. Sometimes it was a 7-year gap. The only person who stayed the whole time was a woman named Eunice Rivers, a nurse, who was paid to follow the people. A lot of people were descendants of slaves and plantations. They had names like Johnson and Smith, and it was hard to keep everybody straight. But the subjects were never told they were an experiment. They were never offered the opportunity to buy treatment and told that there was a possible treatment. So right from the beginning, the study was wrong. People assume that doctors have your best interest at heart, but in this case, they did not, really using people in the worst sense as guinea pigs. There were another 200 people, by the way, who did not have syphilis, who were the controls for people who had syphilis. But over time, given the 36% rate of syphilis in Macon County, people had sex with each other, there were congenital syphilis with babies. It became hard to know which Johnson or which Smith was in the real study. So at this point, they did something really bad. They told people, they put out a poster that that they had bad blood and there was a free treatment, that they should come in for it. And free treatment was a spinal tap. Now, spinal taps are not benevolent. Some people have very bad reactions. I know people who would never let a first-year medical student do his first spinal tap on you because it's a long needle, you have to be very still. If it goes wrong, you can get infected or you can be paralyzed, and it can hurt. So this was a big lie. They had to bribe people to come in and say they would get a free burial. And of course, the idea, as the head of the United States Public Health Service said, was to bring them to autopsy. Another thing that happened is that during World War I and during World War II, some of the men tried to join the armed services. Some of them were actually told they had syphilis, but they were denied the ability to join the armed services. They were also told they couldn't have penicillin. They were also not given any other antibiotics for any other infections because that might interfere with how syphilis progressed. So in the mid-1940s, certainly by 1948, penicillin was discovered. And again, the men were not given penicillin. And there's a little bit of a controversy about this. When I first came to UAB, there was a syphilologist, a man who's still identified that way, an infectious disease, who claimed that after 20 years, people who originally had latent syphilis wouldn't have benefited from getting the small dosages of penicillin that were given to everybody else. He was an apologist, I think, for the study, like a colleague of his named Kampmeyer in Vanderbilt, who also was an apologist. There were a lot of people in infectious disease in the 40s who really were kind of whitewashing the study. But another very influential study said that even the small dosages of penicillin in 1943 might do good. And certainly by 1948, they were giving much larger dosages of penicillin. The physician historian Thomas Benedict, he concluded that about 50 people in the study would have benefited if they had gotten penicillin in 1948, but they never got it. More importantly, we have to go back and understand the historical context of the whole experiment. Some people say they should have gotten informed consent back at the beginning, but legally that did not start until about 1969. Ethically, of course, they should have gotten consent. But also, if we look at an historical perspective, we have to realize that in 1948, most physicians believed that penicillin was a complete magic bullet to cure syphilis. And the subjects were not given penicillin under that belief. So if we switch from proving harm to bad motives, something that an ethicist like Kant might push, the physicians running the study had bad motives. They deliberately withheld a treatment they believed would cure syphilis. About this time, the study moved from the United States Public Health Service to CDC, Centers for Disease Control. There was a man named David Sensor running it, who also was an apologist. He actually published an article suggesting that everyone with latent syphilis should get penicillin. There was a staffer there named Peter Buxton who tried to get CDC to tell people they were in a study. He was threatened with being fired. Another man at CDC, a black staffer, sent articles to newspapers, reporters, and TV stations. But people, it's a complicated study. They didn't understand it, and they needed somebody to go on TV and own it, which nobody would do. So it wasn't until Peter Buxton told a friend of his, the Associated Press reporter Gene Heller, that she broke the story in 1972, and then all hell broke loose. It was still a complicated story, and unfortunately the same day, it was also revealed that one of the nominees for vice president in one of the parties had undergone electroshock torture and had to withdraw. Congress, as a result of the revelation, they formed what today are called institutional review boards, IRBs, and mandated that any study of the federal funds had to go through this kind of physician citizen review board, which still exists today. Later, President Clinton apologized for the study. He brought people to, some of the living people to Washington and publicly apologized for the government doing it. But there's actually another little part of the study that's even darker. So in 2011, an historian named Susan Weberly was looking at the archives of the Tuskegee Study in Washington, D.C., and she discovered that in 1948, the United States Public Health Service, also investigating the long-term consequences of syphilis, went to Guatemala and infected deliberately about 1,500 prisoners with syphilis.
So they went to Guatemala and they found some prostitutes with syphilis, and they arranged for the prostitutes to have sex with prisoners in jail and also with patients who were in a mental hospital, to infect those patients and then give them penicillin to see if it worked. Now, sometimes the patients didn't get sick, so what they did was and this is really horrible, they took their arms and their penises and would abrade them, would sort of rough them up and pour the bacteria onto that skin. And then when that didn't work, they would sometimes just inoculate into the spine. They would do a spinal puncture and give the syphilis that way.
Officials in Guatemala had a fit. I actually had a student doing an internship in Guatemala, and immediately she and all the American researchers were kicked out because Guatemala was so irritated. Hillary Clinton had to go on TV and apologize. She was Secretary of State for what America had done. No one was deliberately infected at the beginning of the Tuskegee Study in America. People got it either through sex or congenitally, but in Guatemala, we actually infected people deliberately. Fred Gray also was a lawyer in Birmingham, and he instituted a suit for the victims, and the federal government decided to pay. It paid not only people in the control study, but people in the study of long-term syphilis, because everybody was having sex with each other, and some people had congenital syphilis, and you didn't know who was whom. Everybody got something, including the descendants who may have had congenital syphilis. That didn't really compensate them very much. The whole thing was a very, very dark tale in American medicine and public health, and its legacy is bad. There's still a very deep distrust of African American people of American medicine. Just one example, when Melissa Gates suggested that as compensation for some of the evils in the past, that African Americans should get a COVID vaccine first, everybody cited the Tuskegee Study and said, we don't want to be the guinea pigs. When 1 million white Americans get the vaccine, then we'll do it. But we ain't going first. That's part of the legacy of Tuskegee. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned from it. If you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe. I'll see you again next Tuesday at 4 p.m.